Welcome to the Practice Squad Podcast, Episode 12. It is Flashback Friday. We are going to be looking over the 2011-2010 Chicago Bulls. This is the podcast where I do way more notes for this than I actually do in school. So the way I'm going to break this down is, I'm going to start with their roster and how they acquired guys. Then I'm going to move on to their biggest threats and roadblocks during the season, following the playoffs, and then giving a quick little conclusion at the end. So the offseason before, the Chicago Bulls were rumored to land Dwayne Wade in free agency. Now this failed because, LeBron and Chris Bosh teamed up with Dwayne Wade to head to Miami, creating an insane super team. They were then later rumored to trade for Carmelo Anthony because he wanted out from the Denver Nuggets. That trade never happened. So it was an underwhelming offseason for the Chicago Bulls. But at the end of it, they picked up Carlos Boozer and Ronnie Brewer. Now heading into the 2010 season, the Bulls were projected to be a top 4 team in the East. Their starting five, it started out with a young, promising superstar who was 22 years old. He had all the offensive ability in the world. He was a great scorer and playmaker, Derrick Rose. He was just someone that you haven't really seen ever before. And he started developing. The season before he was promising, the Bulls were average the season before, however. He had a lot of promise, though, so they're expecting big things from him. At shooting guard, now this was their weakness throughout the entire season. This is honestly maybe what killed them in the playoffs, too. They had a bunch of different guys. I'm going with Ronnie Brewer, though. He was defensive. He's definitely the weak spot of the team. He was a serviceable defender, didn't offer a lot of scoring upside. He wasn't very good. Small forward was Lil Deng. He was an all-around player who could play 35-plus minutes a night. And he led the league in minutes per game more than once in his career. Power forward, they had Taj Gibson, another defensive presence, to grab some rebounds for them. And then Carlos Boozer. Now, this is the only season that he played center. All the other years, he played power forward. He was 6'9". He also signed a 5-year, $80 million contract in free agency. That turned out to be pretty well for the Bulls all around. He could score, he could get rebounds, he could get steals, he could play good D. He was, I wouldn't say a superstar, and I wouldn't say he was a star, but right below that, he was an above-average player for sure. And then one name you didn't hear me mention, Joakim Noah. He was more of a six-man that year. He contributed a rugged style of defense, and he was the key role player for them. Speaking of role players, let's go over their bench. They had Kyle Korver, Kurt Thomas, who also started games at shooting guard, especially in the playoffs. Rookie Omer Ashik, Keith Bogans, and C.J. Watson. This team had great defensive players to complement Rose's and Boozer's scoring. So now when we get into the competition of the East, obviously the Miami Heat were. They were a newly formed Big Three with LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh. And, I really have nothing else to say about that. It just speaks for itself. There were also the Boston Celtics, who had some pretty good battles with Kobe Bryant and the Lakers in the past few seasons. This was pretty much their last realistic shot at a title. They had Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, Rajon Rondo, and Ray Allen. All those guys were aging except for Rondo. They were still a threat, though. They were also coached by Doc Rivers, amazing coach. And then we moved to the last threat in the East, which was the Orlando Magic. Now, they had a decent supporting cast for the most dominant center in the league at the time, Dwight Howard. But they lacked a lot of playmaking, and that killed them. Sounds familiar, huh? Once we head into stats at the end of the year, I'll say the Bulls started off very slow, kind of like the Heat did. And then they just fired off at the end of the year and in the middle of the year. That ended up with them getting the number 1 seed in the East at 62-20. Derrick Rose, we'll go over stats for these players now. Derrick Rose had 25 points per game, 7.7 assists, and 4 rebounds. Boozer had 17.5 points, 2.5 assists, almost 10 rebounds. He had 9.6. Lil Deng led the league playing 39.4 minutes per game. He also had 15 points, 3 assists, and 6.5 rebounds per game. And then Joakim Noah, he started showing signs of being Derrick Rose's sidekick. 11.7 points, 2.2 assists, 10.4 rebounds, 1 steal, and 1.5 blocks. He kind of did it all as center. He wasn't that amazing of a scorer, though. He had a higher win share than the starter of the team, Carlos Boozer, as well. The Bulls finished first in defensive rating, second in rebounds, fifth in blocks, and 20th in offensive rating. Even with Derrick Rose there, even with Boozer contributing on scoring, Chicago still did not get a lot of points, but they were the best defensive team in the league that year. So now we move into the playoffs. And, well, they played against a team that's 37-45. Oh, man, the Indiana Pacers. They were one of the worst shooting teams in the league also. And the thing about the East, and this is kind of, it hasn't been historically true, but especially turning into, like, the 2010s, the East started getting really top and bottom heavy. There weren't a lot of teams in the middle. So you'd have teams like 5 or 6 games under 500 being your 7th seed. Or in this case, the Pacers were your 8th seed. And that really hasn't changed. The thing was, and the Pacers became a threat later into the 2000s. This team was headlined by Roy Hibbert, Danny Granger, Darren Collison, a young Paul George, and in this series, he never scored more than 9 points. Paul George, even today, is not considered a very good playoff performer. The outcome of this, Derrick Rose and Joakim Noah, they just dominated the Pacers. They couldn't do anything about it. I mean, they had Danny Granger playing 40 minutes a night. What do you expect? The Bulls won in 5 games. Then we move into round 2. This is a little bit more interesting. The 44-38 Atlanta Hawks, they were not a great shooting team either. They took down Dwight Howard's Orlando Magic in 6, though. Al Horford, he was young at this time, but he showed a strong competition against Dwight Howard. They had a deep and talented team of Joe Johnson, Jeff Teague, Al Horford, Josh Smith, Marvin Williams, Jamal Crawford, and Zaza Pachulia. This was a deep team, and they would also later, in the 2000s, they'd become a much better team. But the outcome of this, once again, Derrick Rose and Joakim Noah, they were just like peanut butter and jelly. I mean, man, they were throughout the season, and well, it started out where Noah wasn't playing as much, but later into the season, Noah and Rose started playing together more and more. Noah got more minutes, and they ended up dominating the series. They won 4-2, including the Game 6 win, where the Bulls held Atlanta to only 73 points. This defense was just completely smothering. And this is a game where Carlos Boozer had 23 points and 10 rebounds. When you look through all the playoff games, you see Derrick Rose for points almost every single game. You see Joakim Noah for rebounds almost every single game as the team leader. Then Rose for assists, obviously. There's a few games in there, though, where Carlos Boozer showed up. And Boozer, he was an underrated player for the Chicago Bulls. He was very valuable. And one thing I want to add is that Joe Johnson absolutely balled out in this series. He was just an insane scorer. I mean, he had more options. I mean, I don't know. He didn't have a lot of more opportunities. I just wish he played on a better team. Then we head into the Eastern Conference Finals. And they played against the team that loaded up on free agents, let's say. The 58-24 Miami Heat, they were second in the Eastern Conference. They ran over the Sixers in the first round. The Sixers were not very good. And then the eventual downfall of the Boston Celtics, you can thank LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh for that. And they won in 5 games also. And the Celtics were one of the most consistent teams. They played great defense. They were effective at scoring the basketball. There's not really a thing that they did wrong. It's just with those 3 guys, with Spoelstra coaching, with a solid bench behind them, I mean, they were just no match for Miami Heat, who are up and coming. And this is arguably when LeBron James was in his prime. I know it's 2020 and LeBron James is still one of the best basketball players in the league, but this is when he was at his tip-top best. This is when he could hit threes. He had more effort on defense, plus the playmaking, rebounding, and scoring he has today. So in Game 1, Derrick Rose outscored LeBron James. You could say even that he outplayed LeBron James. Chi City won 103-82. This was a huge statement. This was still a pretty young Bulls team. And the thing with young teams is they can get overconfident. And heading into Game 2, playoff LeBron happened. That was just a clear L. Heading into Game 3, series tied 1-1. Carlos Boozer and Derrick Rose were the only ones who showed up. And Chris Bosh, he was kind of an unsung hero in this series. LeBron couldn't have done this all by himself. Chris Bosh showed up in Game 1, dropped 30, I think. And then in Game 3, he dropped 34, the Bulls would lose that game. So then heading into Game 4, it was the same story, but add Joakim Noah into the mix for players who showed up. The game went to OT. The thing is, substitute Chris Bosh for playoff LeBron James. You might not think that's a huge upgrade. Playoff LeBron James is one of the best playoff performers ever. And that game went to OT, but the Bulls lost. So heading into Game 5, 3-1. It wasn't a meme yet. This was a classic game, though. It was back and forth. It ended up being pretty low scoring. Both of the scores were in the 80s. But it was a classic game between LeBron and Derrick Rose. Both of them carried their teams. It was a fun game to watch. At the end, though, the Bulls lost 83-80. This is where it takes a turn for the worst. But first, let's talk a little bit more about the Chicago Bulls this season. After Game 1, the Bulls averaged 83 points per game in this series. And Derrick Rose was really the only consistent scorer. The Heat would later lose to the underdog Dallas Mavericks in 6 games. That just puts a smile on my face to say that. Anything about LeBron James. I'm not a huge LeBron James fan. I can respect that he is one of the greatest, but man, that was a fun series to see him just walk into the locker room and be upset. So, that season, Derrick Rose won the MVP award. And there's a lot of conversation about this, even today, about who should have actually won it. So let's compare the stats. It was either LeBron James or Derrick Rose. LeBron scored 26.7 points per game. Derrick Rose had 25. LeBron had 7 assists per game. Derrick Rose had 7.7. LeBron had 3 more rebounds than Derrick Rose. He also had 0.5 more steals. Both had over 1 steal or more, which was amazing. The thing is that LeBron James led the league in win shares. And that's something that's interesting. Because in LeBron versus Jordan debates, you always think, well, LeBron had a good supporting cast with Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh. Well, yes, that's true, and that ended up helping him win more championships. But LeBron James was still just a different kind of beast, and he led the league in win shares. He's a very important player. He could do everything on the court. So could Derrick Rose, though. And it's tougher to get rebounds as a point guard. It's just Derrick Rose was this up-and-coming superstar that the league, I don't think they needed him. But he was a huge part to the league. He brought back spirit into Chicago. The Bulls were first in attendance. They brought in 800,000 plus fans each night. I mean, it's tough to say who should have won MVP. I'm not really going to say who I think it was, because I think it was just a toss-up. But both were deserving of winning it. So then for the conclusion, after that, Derrick Rose tore his ACL the next season, and he never returned to that same player. He went to the Knicks, he went to the Cavs. I mean, he had some good season with the Bulls before that. But yeah, he went to the Knicks, the Cavs, the T-Wolves. And the second year that he was on the Timberwolves, he started playing better. I mean, you could see some vintage Derrick Rose in him. He had a 50-point game. And that was very emotional for everybody in the NBA universe. And it was really nice to see him do that. And then the past season, he signed a cheap contract with the Pistons. I'm surprised they did that. For 2 years, he kind of showed out. It's tough to tell who's good on the Pistons, because honestly, I don't even know some of the players who are in the rotation. But Derrick Rose did the best that he could. I mean, he's 31 now, I think. Derrick Rose, man, incredible career. I think he should be a Hall of Famer. And, I don't know. We can talk about now Joakim Noah. He went on to become a 2-time All-Star. Then he fell off a cliff without Derrick Rose. He signed a very horrible contract. We all knew this was a horrible contract for him going to the New York Knicks. And it just did not pan out. He got cut 2 seasons later. Grizzlies, retired. Luol Deng and Carlos Boozer both had solid careers after that. They were kind of in their primes during the 2010-2011 season, and they kind of declined after that. This core never won a championship, and they never were. None of them besides Deng and Boozer were ever the same players again. That concludes episode 12 of the Practice Squad podcast. Go show some love by liking, subscribing, and commenting. The next podcast will be on Sunday for Seattle sports. I'm Gabe. See everyone later.
At your party with a pop it at your party with a bust down. With a beamer in the way, I take a bus down. I just saw that in the arena in the uptown. Put the fingers up in here, get you run down. Yeah, get you gunned down. Lashing out at me because I'm up now.